My name is Daniel Pierce. I'm 34 years old, and I rent mountain cabins for a living. Or at least, I used to. Last October, I booked a long-term Airbnb stay in northern Colorado, just outside a small town called Maple Hollow. I'd been burned out from months of city work, and I needed quiet. The photos online promised a view of aspens turning gold, a porch overlooking a valley, and a shed behind the cabin that looked like it had been standing since the 1950s. When I arrived, the road wound higher than I expected. My GPS lost signal about 3 miles before the property, and the last stretch was a single-lane dirt path with ruts deep enough to swallow my tires. The sun was sliding behind the ridge when I finally saw the cabin. Dark timber walls, green tin roof, and smoke still curling from the chimney as if someone had just been there. The key was waiting in a lockbox by the door. A note was taped above it, written in neat, feminine cursive. Welcome, Daniel. Please treat the cabin as your own. Heat is wood burning. Water heater switch is by the stove. Do not open the shed behind the house. No matter what, enjoy your stay. Linda. The last line was underlined twice. At first, I laughed a little. Airbnb hosts loved quirky touches. Feed the cat. Leave a note in the guest book. Please recycle. But don't open the shed felt different. It wasn't playful. It felt like the sort of instruction you don't test just to see what happens. I unpacked my bags and made a small fire to push back the October chill. The cabin was cozy in an old-fashioned way. Antique oil lamps, pine-paneled walls, the faint smell of smoke in everything. The furniture was mismatched but cared for, like it belonged to someone who lived here full-time. Still, I couldn't stop glancing through the kitchen window toward the backyard. The shed sat 20 feet from the porch, paint peeling, roof sagging, half hidden behind a clump of pines. It didn't look dangerous, just forgotten, but there was something about its placement, like it had been intentionally set apart from the rest of the clearing. Around dusk, the wind started to pick up. I stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee and felt that sharp, high-altitude cold bite into my hands. The valley below had gone quiet. No birds, no dogs, not even the rustle of leaves. When the wind died, the silence stayed. That's when I first heard it. A single knock, faint but solid, from somewhere behind the cabin. I froze. It came again. 2 knocks, slow, deliberate. My brain immediately went to rational explanations. An animal, branches tapping the siding, or the shed creaking in the wind. I wasn't about to start thinking ghosts. Still, the sound didn't match the rhythm of wind or wood. It was too intentional. I circled around the porch, flashlight in hand, and aimed it toward the trees. The beam caught the shed door. It wasn't moving, but for a second, I thought I saw something darker between the slats, a shape shifting just enough to break the line of shadow. Then the wind kicked back up, hard enough to scatter leaves across my boots. When I looked again, the gap was empty. I decided that was enough exploration for night 1. Inside, I tried to shake it off with a beer and a movie, but I couldn't get comfortable. The cabin creaked constantly, wood expanding and contracting with the cold. Every few minutes, I caught myself listening for another knock. Around 11, I gave up and went to bed early. The bedroom faced the backyard. Before turning off the lamp, I looked once more through the curtains. The shed stood still, half lit by moonlight, door shut tight. For some reason, I whispered under my breath, "Don't open it." No matter what, I must have fallen asleep. around midnight. The dream started simple. I was standing on the porch, same as before, only everything was washed in pale gray light. No stars, no moon, just that even, colorless glow. The wind wasn't blowing, not a sound anywhere. Then, from the trees, a knock. 3 this time. I turned toward the shed. The door was open. Something was inside, crouched low, motionless. I couldn't see its face, just the pale outline of shoulders and hands pressed against the floorboards, as if it were waiting for permission to stand. I remember trying to speak, to call out, but no sound came. The figure began to rise, slow and steady, until its head touched the top of the doorway. That's when I woke up. The cabin was dark, except for the dying glow of the stove. My phone said 3:12 a.m. I lay there, heart hammering, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare brought on by isolation and too much beer. Then something scraped outside the window. Not footsteps, not wind, more like wood dragging on gravel. I sat up, pulled the curtain a half-inch. The shed door was open, only a few inches, but open. I froze, barely breathing. The air inside the cabin felt colder than outside, heavy and still. Every instinct told me not to move, not to even blink. Then, from the trees beyond the shed, a faint whisper, or maybe the wind again, murmured something that sounded like my name. Daniel. Soft, drawn out, almost curious. I stumbled back from the window, knocking my water bottle off the table. It hit the floor with a dull clunk, and the sound snapped something in me. Fight or flight switching on. I grabbed my flashlight, forced myself to the porch, and swung the beam toward the yard. The shed door was shut again. No movement, no voice, nothing but my own breath fogging the light. I told myself I'd imagined it. Mountain acoustics could play tricks. Wind echoing through valleys, animals moving under brush. But when I stepped closer, I saw the dirt in front of the shed. There were prints, bare footprints, small, maybe a woman's, maybe a child's, stamped deep into the mud and leading straight to the door, and none coming back. I didn't sleep again that night. By morning, the prints had half vanished under frost, and the shed looked as harmless as before. Sunlight made everything seem ordinary again. I even laughed about it while making coffee, telling myself I'd write it off as mountain nerves. Then I noticed something new. On the kitchen counter, beside the folded welcome note, lay a small metal key I hadn't seen before. Old brass, tarnished, with a strip of masking tape, labeled shed. It hadn't been there last night. I stared at the brass key for a long time before touching it. Morning light cut across the counter, catching the tarnish like old blood on metal. The tape label, shed, looked aged too, as though it had been written years ago. The ink faded to brown. I told myself it must have been there the whole time. Maybe I'd missed it last night, exhausted from the drive and the scare. Still, I knew I hadn't. The note had been alone on that counter. I remembered how neatly it was placed, how I'd flattened it under my palm before walking away. I didn't touch the key. Not then. I dropped it in the drawer with the matches and went outside to breathe. The air was sharp with frost, the kind that burns your lungs. The yard was quiet again, sunlight just starting to touch the pines. For the first time since arriving, I noticed how still the place really was. No sound of wildlife, no distant cars, not even a single bird. Just the faint creak of trees shifting under cold wind. The shed looked different in daylight, smaller, ordinary. A padlock hung from the door latch, rusted shut. I told myself the key probably fit that lock. Still, I didn't test it. Not yet. I spent the morning exploring the trails around the cabin. There was a slope that led down to a dry creek bed, another that wound up toward a ridge with cell reception. From there, I called my sister, just to hear a human voice. She laughed when I told her about the do not open rule. Classic horror movie setup, she said. You're gonna die first. Her words were joking, but they hit wrong. I'd been in that kind of movie before, the kind where unease hides in small details, waiting for night to fall again. When I got back that afternoon, the sky had already started to dim. Mountain daylight is cruelly short in October. The cabin felt colder than before. Though I'd left the stove burning, my phone battery was nearly dead, and there was no service down in the valley. I figured I'd charge it overnight and drive into town the next day. Then I saw footprints again, not the old ones from last night. These were fresh, faint, pressed into the soft mud between the porch steps and the shed, smaller than mine, maybe barefoot again. They trailed in a half circle around the side of the shed and stopped abruptly at the wall. No exit path. I stood there for a long time, pretending to study the ground, trying to convince myself it was wildlife. Maybe a raccoon, or deer hooves softened by mud. But something in me knew better. I went inside, locked the door, and added more wood to the stove. The house settled into the same quiet rhythm as before, each creak and sigh amplified by isolation. I tried reading to distract myself, but my eyes kept drifting to the window, to the outline of that shed. At dusk, I heard the first knock again. One, then two, then silence. It was unmistakable this time, coming directly from the shed's side wall. Not the door, but the wall facing the cabin. It sounded almost polite, like someone asking to be let in. I forced myself to stay still. My rational mind said, it could be the wood contracting in cold. My gut said something else entirely. When the knocking stopped, I poured whiskey into my coffee and sat by the fire until I was sure the noise wouldn't return. By 9, I'd convinced myself to call it an early night. But just before bed, I checked the counter again. The key was gone. The drawer was open an inch, empty except for matches. I searched the floor, the sink, under the folded towel I'd set beside it. Nothing. A cold wave rolled through me, part fear, part disbelief. I started laughing quietly. That thin, desperate kind of laugh that doesn't reach your chest. Okay, I said out loud to no one. Good joke. Very funny. The cabin didn't answer. I double-checked the locks, pulled the curtains, and sat in the armchair facing the window. I didn't want to sleep. Around midnight, the wind began to moan through the pines again, and I realized how easily that sound could turn into words. If you listened long enough. Sometime after 2, I must have dozed off. A sound woke me, metal clinking softly, steady as breathing. The padlock. I grabbed the flashlight and edged toward the window. Through the gap in the curtain, I saw the shed door, wide open this time, moonlight spilling into its black interior. Something moved inside, a faint shuffling, like fabric brushing against wood. Then a shape, pale, narrow shoulders, a hint of hair. It stepped forward. At first, I thought it was a woman, long hair, thin arms, but when the light shifted, I saw her, or it, clearly enough to realize she wasn't walking right. Her knees bent wrong, too low, as if she were still half crawling. She stopped halfway to the porch, her head tilted up. Even from that distance, I felt her looking at me. I killed the light and backed away. My pulse pounded in my ears so hard I thought I'd pass out. I waited, counting seconds, listening for movement. Then, footsteps on the porch. Soft, deliberate, wood creaked under each step. She was outside the door. I held my breath. The handle twitched once, then again. Slow, testing. I pressed my weight against the door, whispering, without thinking, "Don't open it." After what felt like forever, the pressure stopped. Silence returned. Deep, suffocating. I waited another minute, then another. When I finally looked through the peephole, there was nothing. No one on the porch. No sound outside. I didn't sleep again. At dawn, I checked. The shed door was closed and padlocked. The ground between it and the porch was untouched. No footprints, no drag marks, no sign of anything, only the faint frost melting in the morning sun. I thought about packing and leaving, but the nearest town was an hour down a mountain road with no reception. And honestly, part of me didn't want to look weak. I had survived worse things. Storms, break-ins, isolation. This was just a scare, I told myself. Some animal or trick of the light. That's what I wanted to believe. Then, while making coffee, I heard it again. Soft and close this time. Not from the shed, from under the floorboards. A small rhythmic tapping, like a finger brushing wood from beneath the house. Tap, tap, tap. I crouched near the vent by the stove, holding my breath. The sound stopped. For maybe 10 seconds, there was nothing. Then a whisper, muffled but distinct, floated up through the vent. "Please, open it." My stomach turned to ice. I stumbled backward, spilling coffee across the floor. The voice wasn't angry. It was pleading, familiar somehow. And when it spoke again, quieter this time, it didn't sound like a stranger at all. "Daniel, it's cold." The voice stopped me cold, not because it sounded monstrous. It didn't. It was calm, weak, and terribly human. It sounded like me. I crouched again, careful not to breathe too loudly, and angled my flashlight toward the vent. The beam caught dust swirling through cold air, tiny particles glittering like ash. Nothing moved. I listened for another word, another scrape, anything. Nothing came. After a minute, I replaced the vent cover and backed away. My brain kept cycling through explanations, echoes, air pressure, pipes, but none of them fit what I'd heard. My own name whispered from below the house in my own voice. I could feel logic start to fray. I shoved my boots on, stepped outside, and circled to the back of the cabin where the crawl space was. A small wooden hatch sat just above the ground line, half hidden behind stacked firewood. I pulled at the handle. It didn't move. Rusted shut. That's when I noticed the prints again. Faint this time. Toes pointing toward the hatch. Bare, human. Smaller than mine. They stopped right in front of it. No returning set. I stood there until my skin prickled. The shed loomed beyond the yard, gray in morning fog, the padlock glinting dully. For some reason, I thought of the missing key. If someone, or something, had come up from under the cabin, they'd need an exit. By afternoon, I couldn't stand being inside anymore. I packed a backpack with essentials, locked the door behind me, and started down the mountain trail. I told myself I'd head into Maple Hollow, find a diner, call the host, maybe even leave early. Halfway down the path, my phone buzzed with a flicker of signal. Relief came fast and bright. I opened Airbnb, found the listing, and tapped the message host button. A red banner popped up. listing no longer available. I tried again. Same result. The entire page had vanished. Even my booking history showed nothing past a blank receipt. Something in my chest tightened. I called the emergency line listed in my original confirmation email. It rang once, then went dead. The wind shifted then, uphill, carrying the faint smell of smoke. I turned back toward the cabin. A thin thread of gray rose from behind the trees. The shed. For a heartbeat, I considered ignoring it and walking on, but curiosity is its own curse. I went back. By the time I reached the clearing, the smoke had thinned into nothing. The shed stood closed, quiet, unremarkable. Only the faintest wisp curled from the gap near its roof, like breath in cold air. I don't remember deciding to walk closer. My legs just moved. The padlock hung open. The hasp bent slightly, as if it had been forced. The door creaked when I touched it. Inside smelled of old earth and damp metal. My flashlight beam cut through dust thick enough to taste. Against the far wall sat a table littered with tools. Rusted nails, a hammer, what might have once been a lantern, and in the center of the dirt floor, a square wooden hatch, identical to the one beneath the cabin. I felt every warning in my body light up at once, but my name came again. So soft, I almost missed it. Daniel, please. It came from below the hatch. I knelt beside it. The boards were rough, the edges blackened with age. A small metal ring served as a handle. My hand hovered above it, shaking. What if it was someone trapped? What if this entire rule existed because the host didn't want guests stumbling onto an old cellar or a well? Rational, believable, safe. I pulled. The hatch opened with a sigh of cold air. My light caught a short ladder, descending into dark earth. 10, maybe 12 feet down, the dirt gave way to stone. A tunnel. The smell was strange. Damp, metallic, faintly sweet. I called down, voice cracking, "Hello?" Silence. I should have closed it right there. Instead, I lowered one foot onto the ladder. The wood groaned but held. I climbed halfway down, flashlight sweeping across the tunnel walls. They looked carved, not dug. Edges too clean, too intentional. Something moved just out of reach of the beam. A shadow retreating deeper. I froze. Who's down there? The reply came from behind me. Daniel, come back. I twisted around, beam catching the top of the ladder, and saw myself standing there. Same jacket, same boots, same face. Except his eyes were wrong. Darker. Still, he smiled slightly, like I'd just stepped into a trap. We both understood. You shouldn't have opened it, he said. The light flickered. The ladder shook violently, rattling against the dirt walls. I lost my grip, dropped the flashlight, and scrambled up with everything I had. When I broke through the hatch, the air hit like ice water. The other me was gone. I slammed the door shut, threw the padlock through the loop, and ran for the cabin without looking back. Inside, I locked every door and window, then sat by the fire trying to breathe. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told myself again and again that I'd imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, isolation. It could twist your mind. I stayed awake until the fire died. Sometime near dawn, I must have drifted off. A sound woke me, not knocking this time. Dragging. Wood scraping across wood. It came from the porch, then the wall, then directly under the floor. I crouched by the vent again. No whisper now, just the soft rhythm of something moving below me. Then, faintly, the sound of nails scratching upward against the boards. I whispered, "Please stop," before realizing I was repeating the same words the voice had said to me the night before. The scraping ceased. A pause, then a single knock, slow, deliberate, came from beneath my feet. 3 seconds later, another, louder, closer. The boards under the vent bulged slightly, wood fibers stretching. A single fingertip, pale and trembling, pushed through the seam. I stumbled back, heart hammering, watching it probe the air. The skin looked translucent, almost waxy, veins dark beneath the surface. The finger twisted once, then retreated. The vent cover slid a few inches sideways, as if nudged from below. A voice rose again, calm and measured. "It's warm up there. Let me in." Every hair on my body stood on end. I kicked the vent shut, shoved the rug over it, and backed into the farthest corner of the room. Silence followed. When morning came, I checked. The vent was sealed, but faint smears of mud streaked the boards around it. 5 of them, finger marks. I spent the next hour packing. Food, wallet, keys. I didn't care about the refund or the host. I was leaving. But when I opened the front door, I froze. The porch was gone. Not destroyed, just missing. Where it should have been was dirt. And beyond that, the shed. Closer now, 10 feet from the door. And in the dirt between them, a brass key. Shiny. New. The tape label still wet with ink. House. The ground where my porch had been was raw earth, freshly torn, as if something had peeled it away in the night. My boots sank into it when I stepped forward. The soil was damp, black, and smelled faintly of smoke. The shed stood just beyond the mess, closer than it had any right to be. Its shadow fell across the spot where my front steps once were. The brass key sat upright in the dirt, perfectly balanced. The strip of tape, house, looked freshly written, the ink still wet enough to blur at the edges. I knelt and touched it with the tip of one finger. It was warm. I told myself not to pick it up, then I did anyway. The moment my skin met the metal, the wind died, the woods, the creak of trees, even the distant drip of melting frost. Gone. The silence wasn't absence but pressure, heavy and close. I could hear my heartbeat in it. Something about the key felt wrong. It wasn't the same tarnished brass as the first one. It looked new, polished, untouched by weather. Yet when I turned it over, faint scratches lined the back, tiny, deliberate letters etched into the metal. Let it in. The cabin door was still open behind me, swinging slightly, hinges sighing. From inside came a faint rhythm. Tap, 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 like someone knocking softly from within the walls. I stepped backward until my shoulder brushed the frame. The air inside felt different, denser, darker somehow. I held the key tight enough to cut my palm. That's when I noticed the footprints again. Not just one set this time. Dozens. Bare, small, overlapping in every direction around the house. Some vanished into the dirt. Others led to the shed. And at least 2 trails went straight to the door I was standing in. I forced myself inside, closed it, and turned the deadbolt. The sound it made, a dull click, felt final. The tapping stopped. For the next hour, I sat by the cold stove, clutching the key and trying not to think. My brain felt fogged, heavy, as though the altitude had doubled overnight. I told myself I'd wait for daylight to strengthen, then walk to town. It couldn't be more than 5 or 6 miles. I packed again. I didn't look out the window, not at the shed, not at the dirt. But before I could shoulder my pack, a sound broke the quiet. Slow, steady footsteps on the porch, except there was no porch anymore. I froze. The steps continued anyway, circling the house, creaking across boards that weren't there. Each one landed exactly where the old porch had been. They stopped by the door. Then, a knock. I stared at the handle. It trembled once, like a breath against skin. Then came a voice. Low, quiet, almost tired. Daniel, please. The house is cold. The same voice from under the floor. Calm, patient. I didn't move. I didn't answer. You brought the key, it said. Use it. Something brushed the bottom of the door, like fingertips tracing the grain. My chest clenched. I looked down and saw a shadow under the frame, slender and trembling, a hand. I stepped backward until my heel hit the couch. The knocking stopped. Silence returned, thick enough to drown in. For a long time, nothing happened. The key burned hotter in my palm, a faint vibration humming through the metal, like a living pulse. When I finally dropped it, it didn't fall. It hovered an inch above the floor, spinning slowly on its axis before tilting toward the door, pointing like a compass needle. The deadbolt slid open on its own. I slammed my body against the door just as it began to push inward. The pressure on the other side was enormous. Not violent, just steady, irresistible, like the slow tide of a current. Wood groaned, hinges cracked, my shoulder screamed. Daniel, the voice murmured, almost kindly. You left it open before. Let me finish coming in. I don't know where the strength came from, but I shouted, raw. Horse, no. The sound broke something. The weight on the door vanished, leaving only the echo of my own voice bouncing through the cabin. I stayed pressed there until my breathing slowed. The key lay motionless on the floor again. When I picked it up, it was ice cold. The words, "Let it in," had vanished, replaced by new scratches. Too late. Outside, clouds were thickening, dragging the light down. Snow began to fall in slow, soft flakes, melting when they touched the window glass. The world looked emptied out, washed of color. I decided I couldn't wait for morning. I left everything behind but the car keys and flashlight. When I opened the door, snow was already a thin blanket across the dirt. My tracks were the only ones visible until I reached the edge of the yard. There, in the fresh snow, were two sets of prints running parallel to mine, barefoot, deep, fresh enough that snow hadn't filled them yet. I didn't turn around. I just walked faster. The road down the mountain twisted through pines that leaned too close, branches brushing the roof of my car like fingers. The further I went, the worse the weather grew. The snow thickened into a white curtain, and the road vanished under it. GPS still dead. The heater blew cold air no matter how high I turned the dial. About 5 miles down, a figure appeared in the headlights. I slammed the brakes. Tires skidded, car sliding sideways before stopping. The beam caught her full on. A woman, standing in the middle of the road, head tilted, barefoot, wearing a thin white dress soaked through with snowmelt. She lifted one hand and pointed toward the passenger side of the car. My window fogged instantly from inside. A heartbeat later, a handprint bloomed across the glass. I didn't look. I just floored it. The car fishtailed, engine roaring, tires spinning against slush. When the road straightened, she was gone. The handprint remained, dripping water down the inside of the glass. By the time I reached Maple Hollow, daylight had faded to a bruised gray. I pulled into the first gas station I saw, shaking, covered in sweat despite the cold. Inside, the clerk looked up with tired eyes. "You okay, man?" I tried to answer, but couldn't form words. He poured me coffee and asked where I was coming from. When I told him the cabin's name, Aspen Valley Retreat, his expression changed. He shook his head slowly. "That place burned down 3 years ago," he said. "Lightning strike. Killed the owner. You must have seen a different one." I pulled out my phone, opened Airbnb again, tried to show him the listing. Nothing. My booking history ended a month before I'd even made the reservation. No receipt, no messages. The clerk frowned. "Buddy, you sure you're not mixed up? That hill's been closed off since the fire. There's nothing up there but a concrete slab and an old shed." My stomach dropped. He offered to call a tow truck to check the site if I wanted proof. I said no. I just sat there, staring into my coffee, waiting for my hands to stop trembling. Then, something clinked against the counter. The clerk looked down. "You dropped this." It was the brass key, the one labeled house. Only now, the tape was gone, and in its place, carved deep into the metal, were 2 words: "Welcome back." I didn't remember putting the key in my pocket, but there it was, warm again. I stared at it until the clerk cleared his throat. "Man, you sure you're all right?" I nodded, though my throat was tight. He told me the nearest motel was 15 minutes south. I thanked him, left the coffee untouched, and walked back into the cold. Snow had stopped, but the sky was the color of steel. My car sat alone at the pump, windows iced from the inside. When I brushed it off, I caught my reflection faintly in the glass. Only it lagged a second behind. That's the moment I knew I wasn't done with that mountain. The drive to the motel passed in silence. Every radio station hissed static. I checked my phone again, desperate for anything that proved the cabin existed. No listing, no messages, no pictures. Only one new photo in my gallery. Black, grainy, time-stamped 3:12 a.m. The view of the shed door, wide open, something pale crouched inside. I booked a room and locked the door twice. The key stayed on the nightstand. I couldn't throw it away. I couldn't stop looking at it. By midnight, exhaustion won. Sometime in the night, I heard footsteps, not in the hall, inside the room, slow, measured. They stopped by the bed. When I turned on the lamp, the room was empty, but the key was gone. I found it in the morning, outside on the hood of my car, perfectly centered, dry despite the snow. My first instinct was to drive away, forget it all. But that word, welcome, felt heavier than metal. If the cabin had burned down, what had I stayed in? The question pulled me back. By noon, I was heading north again, up the same twisting road. The snow had melted from the lower slopes, leaving mud and dead grass. The higher I climbed, the quieter it got. No birds, no sound, but tires grinding gravel. When I reached the property line, I almost didn't recognize it. The clearing was there, but where the cabin had stood was only a foundation, charred and cracked. The ground inside was scorched black. The shed, though, was untouched. It looked cleaner, repaired, the roof straightened, the boards freshly painted. I killed the engine and stepped out. Air felt wrong, too still. The same cold that had followed me since that first night settled behind my ribs. There was a sound then, faint and steady, a heartbeat, slow and patient. I realized it was coming from my pocket. The key. I pulled it out. It throbbed faintly against my skin. And the moment I stepped toward the shed, the padlock clicked open by itself. The door creaked. The smell hit me first. Burnt pine and whetstone, like the air inside a long-sealed mine. I expected the hatch, the tunnel, the ladder, but the shed was empty, floor swept clean. Only the far wall remained blackened, streaked like something had tried to crawl out through flame. Then I saw it, faint writing scratched into the boards. It doesn't burn if you let it in. The heartbeat in the key grew louder, matching my own. I turned toward the ruins of the cabin. Smoke was rising from it now, thin and gray, curling from cracks in the stone. And through that haze, I saw the front door standing upright, alone, not attached to anything, a single frame in the middle of the foundation. My door, the handle turned. I should have run. Instead, I walked forward, every step sinking into soft ash. The moment I reached the door, the key in my hand grew almost too hot to hold. I pressed it into the lock. It slid in easily, as if it had been waiting. When I turned it, something exhaled. The air shifted. The mountain wind stopped. The world tilted, sound bending like a low hum. Behind me, the shed door slammed. Through the open frame of what had been my cabin, light bloomed, orange and flickering. I was no longer looking into ruin, but into a room, whole and glowing, fire crackling in the stove. My backpack lay by the couch, my boots by the door. It was the same cabin, alive again. Inside, the air smelled of pine and coffee. The vent cover near the stove was gone, leaving a clean, dark hole. From below came a voice, quiet and patient. You came back. I took one step inside. The temperature dropped instantly. The light dimmed, color bleeding out of everything. The voice rose again, softer this time. It's your turn. The floor trembled beneath me. Hands, thin, gray, familiar, pressed through the boards around the vent, one after another. 5, 10, more, each palm flat, pushing upward, slow as roots breaking through soil. I stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The door behind me had vanished. The key fell from my hand and sank through the floor as though the wood were water. The voices multiplied, men, women, children, all whispering the same two words. Stay warm. Something crawled up through the vent, not a body, but a shape of smoke and light, folding in on itself. It stretched tall, head brushing the ceiling, eyes like twin coals, dimming in rhythm with my heartbeat. The fire in the stove went out. Then, the thing leaned down. Its face stopped inches from mine, and in that instant I understood. It wasn't a ghost or a demon. It was everything that had burned here. Every breath caught in smoke, every life that never left. And it wanted to be inside again. It whispered one last time, almost kindly, "Welcome home, Daniel." The heat vanished. The world folded. For a second, I felt nothing but falling. Then, darkness. When I woke, I was sitting in the same armchair by the stove, flames crackling, morning light spilling through the window. The cabin looked exactly as it had on my first night. My phone buzzed on the counter. A new message from Linda, host, blinking on the screen. "Welcome back. So glad you're enjoying your stay. Remember, please, do not open the shed, no matter what." I stared at it for a long time. Outside, the shed door was already swinging open. When I first noticed the frost on the window, I thought it was just morning chill. Then I realized it was the same frost pattern I'd seen my first night. The same tiny web of cracks in the corner. The same crescent of breath, frozen mid-sigh. I touched it, half expecting it to melt under my fingers. It didn't. The air smelled of pine smoke and coffee again. The same mug sat steaming on the counter. Same folded note, with the same neat cursive. "Welcome, Daniel. Please treat the cabin as your own." Do not open the shed. No matter what, my heart climbed into my throat. I looked down. The brass key rested beside it. The old one, the tarnished one with tape, labeled shed. The key I'd lost days ago. I took a step back. The floor creaked in the same rhythm I remembered. Every detail replayed, perfectly rehearsed. The fire, the clock, even the way the wind paused between gusts. It was all identical. I didn't want to believe it. I forced myself to open the door, to see if the road was there, if the car was waiting. It wasn't. The world outside had been pared down to essentials. The shed, the tree line, the same gray sky without sun or depth, no sound of wildlife, no footprints from before, only my own. I tried my phone, battery full, no service, same as that first night. When I scrolled through the photos, there was only one. The shed door, half open, time stamped 3:12 a.m. again. That time hit me like a bruise. I didn't want to see it happen a second time. I made rules for myself instead. Don't touch the key. Don't open the shed. Don't look outside after dark. If I could keep those three, maybe the pattern would break. Maybe morning would finally mean morning. I lasted until sunset. The fire snapped and hissed. The wind slid through the cracks in the walls like a whisper. I sat in the chair, forcing my eyes to stay on the flames, not the window. When the knock came, it was softer this time, more patient. Tap, tap, tap. I whispered, no. It came again, in the same rhythm as before. 3 beats, a pause, 3 more. Then the faint sound of something brushing against the siding. Slow, deliberate. I turned up the stove, fed it wood, filled the air with smoke, until my eyes watered. Anything to drown out the quiet. That's when I noticed the voice wasn't coming from outside this time. It was behind me. Daniel, low, gentle, from the corner by the bedroom door. I swung the flashlight there. The beam hit empty space for a breath. Then the light bent. Something was standing in its way, not solid, a distortion, like heat shimmer. It stepped closer. The temperature fell. My breath fogged out and hung, suspended, unmoving. You never left, it said. I backed toward the kitchen. You burned, I managed. I saw the ruin. It tilted its head. The outline of its face rippled, like the memory of skin. You rebuilt it said simply. Felt the floor shift beneath me. The boards flexed. For a split second, I saw what was under them. A dozen faces, looking up through the gaps, eyes open, mouths moving without sound. I ran. The front door was there again. The same latch, the same faint brass shine of the deadbolt. When I grabbed the handle, it turned liquid cold. The metal stuck to my palm, skin tearing free when I yanked it back. The door didn't open. Instead, something knocked. From the other side, 3 sharp hits, then silence. The thing in the room stepped closer. The light trembled around it. I realized then that it wasn't moving through space. It was bending space, pulling it closer, like a blanket. You came for quiet, it murmured. You wanted to be alone. You are. The shed door outside groaned open on its hinges. I could hear it even through the walls. The wind poured in from nowhere, and the fire went out in one breath. The cabin plunged into dark. Something moved in that dark, soft, quick, darting along the walls. Under the floor, I could feel it pressing close, circling. When my flashlight flickered back on, the walls were wrong. They weren't wood anymore. They were packed earth, black and glistening with moisture. I was in the tunnel again, the one beneath the shed. The ladder behind me was gone. Ahead, the tunnel opened wider, glowing faintly orange, like light reflected from deep water. I followed it, because I couldn't not. Each step echoed, like footsteps from above, returning in perfect sync. The tunnel curved once, twice, then opened into a chamber lined with wooden beams, the same kind that had held up the cabin. A table stood in the center. On it lay every object I'd touched since I arrived. My mug, my phone, my lighter, both keys. The phone screen lit up on its own. A notification appeared. Message from Linda. So glad you're enjoying your stay. You've been such a polite guest. My reflection bloomed across the glass. For a heartbeat, it wasn't me. The eyes were black, the smile too wide. I dropped the phone. The screen went dark. From the tunnel behind me came footsteps, bare feet slapping wet dirt. A woman's breathing, the same whispering chorus, rising behind her. Stay warm, stay warm, stay warm. The light flickered again. The shape of the cabin returned around me. Walls reforming from smoke and ash. The fire snapped back to life. I was sitting once more in the chair by the stove. And this time, I wasn't alone. Across from me, in the other chair, sat the woman in the white dress. Her skin was gray now, eyes empty, but watching. She smiled faintly. You understand it now, she said. It keeps itself alive. Her hand brushed the armrest, and flakes of ash fell from her wrist like dust. It just needs someone to remember it. When she vanished, the cabin shifted again, timbers sighing like lungs, filling after too long underwater. A faint knock sounded from the back wall, from inside the wood itself. The boards rippled outward, forming the shape of a door I hadn't seen before. The key appeared in my lap, the same message carved into it. Welcome back. I didn't move, couldn't. The air tasted of iron and smoke. Outside, through the window, dawn never came. The sky stayed gray, fixed. I sat there until the fire burned itself out, the key growing heavier in my hand until it felt less like metal and more like a pulse. When the last ember dimmed, I whispered to the empty room, "What happens if I don't open it?" The house answered in its slow, creaking breath. "Then it opens you." The last ember cracked like bone and fell apart. I didn't bother adding wood. The air had already thickened into heatless smoke, curling low and slow across the floor. I could taste the metal in it. The key pulsed once more in my hand, then went still. When I dropped it, it didn't hit the boards. It sank through them. Like the floor had turned liquid, I watched the ripples fade. The cabin sighed. Outside, the gray sky lightened for a second, and I thought maybe dawn had finally come. But it wasn't light from above. It was rising from below, seeping through the seams in the floorboards, soft orange breathing up into the room, like fire through a grate. I whispered, "No," but the walls had already begun to change. Wood darkened, swelling and splitting. The knots in the planks widened into eyes. The ceiling arched, groaning under its own heartbeat. The cabin wasn't a place anymore. It was a body. I stumbled to the door. The original one. The one I'd turned the key in when I thought I'd escaped. The knob was still slick with frost, metal groaning as I twisted. It turned halfway, before jamming. Something on the other side turned it back. Then a whisper. Mine again, but older, calmer. It's time to stay warm. The door opened inward. Standing there was me, the same flannel, same jacket, but his skin was ash gray, his eyes empty light. He didn't look angry, just tired. He stepped aside and gestured to the snowless world outside. The shed was gone. The trees bent inward, all their branches pointing toward the cabin. "You built this place," he said. "Now it builds you." I tried to speak, but my breath smoked out in thick plumes. He tilted his head, that same slow curiosity I'd seen in the thing inside the shed. "You kept it alive. Every time you opened the door, every time you looked back." His hand brushed the frame, and where he touched, the wood bloomed black with heat. "It needs someone to hold its shape. It chose you because you came alone." Behind him, the landscape was fading, hills flattening into mist, trees dissolving into outlines. Only the cabin stayed clear. I stepped back, shaking my head. "No, I left. I burned." He smiled faintly, almost kindly. "You burned with it." The floor under my boots grew hot, soft. I looked down. The boards were turning to ash beneath me, edges curling like paper. Beneath that, flame. I ran for the window, slammed my shoulder into the glass. It didn't break. The world beyond looked painted on, a flat image of gray snow and static air. The house groaned again, deeper this time, like a throat clearing before it swallows. I turned back toward the door. My reflection, my other self, was gone. The doorway opened to nothing, just a hallway of light stretching into a horizon that pulsed like breath. The key clattered against the floor behind me. Without thinking, I picked it up. It was no longer brass. It was bone. Etched along its side were words I couldn't look at too long without forgetting how to read them. They shimmered, rearranging themselves each time my eyes focused. But one phrase held, "Close it from the inside." I understood, or thought I did. I walked toward the glowing hall, the air growing hotter, heavier, until the wood began to melt into the shape of flesh again. Walls flexing, heartbeat steady. Every step left my boots smoking. The key pulsed like a living thing. Voices followed me from behind the walls. Dozens, hundreds, whispering over each other. "Stay warm. Stay quiet. Don't open it." They sounded like every guest who had ever stayed here, their words circling in an endless loop. At the end of the hall stood another door, the same door as before, only inverted. Hinges on the wrong side, handle on the inside. I pressed the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. The heartbeat in the walls stopped. When I turned the key, the house exhaled one final time. The light vanished. The air froze. I expected to wake up again in that chair. Same fire, same morning. Instead, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table. Everything perfectly ordinary. Coffee steaming, window frost, glinting in sunlight. Outside, snow fell lightly. The shed stood where it always had, peaceful, harmless. For a moment, I almost believed it was over. Then I noticed the sound, a soft tapping, under the floorboards, measured and familiar. I leaned close, whispering the words before they came, as if to prove I already knew the script. "Daniel, it's cold," the voice answered, pleased. "Then open up, won't you?" I smiled, tired and hollow, and reached for the key, resting beside my coffee. It was warm again,